In a world where survival is a brutal dance between predator and prey, a wolf who failed to protect her pack finds herself lost in the wilderness. But as the forest whispers her deepest regrets, a mysterious human appears, bringing with him the shadow of a fate she never thought possible. Can two souls bound by ancient secrets ever escape the darkness that haunts them both? The forest was quiet, too quiet. In the heart of the wilderness, where the trees stretched far and wide, the wind had stopped its usual whisper. Instead, there was an eerie stillness, as if the very earth was holding its breath. She stood at the edge of the ridge, her body rigid, eyes staring down into the valley where the remnants of her pack lay. The scent of blood hung thick in the air, choking her, even as her senses screamed at her to run, to escape the agony. But she couldn't. Not now. Not after failing them. A sharp, bitter cry broke the silence. Her own. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees, and then dissipating into nothing. She was alone. Her pack, her family, torn apart in a single night, and all because she was too slow, too weak. She had heard the distant sounds of claws on the ground, of bodies crashing, of desperate howls in the night. She had heard it all, but had been too far to intervene, too far to protect them. By the time she reached them, it was already over. The enemy had already claimed her pack. She had tried, she had fought, but the battle was lost before it had even begun. Her legs trembled beneath her, the weight of her failure too much to bear. She had been their protector, their leader, and now she was nothing. Just a broken wolf standing in a silent world. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves, whispering to her. Or was it? Her senses were frayed, and she barely trusted her own mind anymore. The whispers were only a reminder of how she had failed. The forest had witnessed it all. Turning away from the devastation below, the wolf began to move. She had no destination. She was just running from the unbearable truth. Her paws pressed against the earth, but it felt hollow. She felt hollow. The days bled into one another. The forest, once full of life and vitality, now felt alien to her. Every tree seemed to stand as a silent judge, every gust of wind a reminder of what she had lost. She wandered aimlessly, moving through the trees with no purpose, her mind clouded by guilt. There were no other wolves left to join, no pack to return to. She was alone, and the forest itself seemed to recoil from her presence, as though it too had forsaken her. In the dead of night, when the moon cast pale shadows upon the earth, the wolf would often stop and listen. Her ears would strain for the faintest sound, the rustling of leaves, the crack of a branch, the scent of another predator, but it was always the same: silence. And then, as the silence stretched on, the weight of her failure would consume her. One evening, as she sat by the edge of a river, her reflection caught in the water, she saw the truth clearly. She was no longer the proud, strong wolf who had led her pack. She was a shadow of what she had been. The pack's memory lingered like a phantom, and each day that passed felt like another nail in the coffin of her spirit. She was nothing without them. But it wasn't just the pack she mourned, it was herself. The forest had once been her kingdom, and she had ruled it with strength and grace. Now it was a prison, and she was its captive. It was the smell that first alerted her, a faint trace of something different, something human. The wolf froze, her muscles tensing. She had been alone for so long, and the thought of another creature, especially a human, sent a tremor through her. Yet, there it was again. The scent of warmth and fire, of something distinctly unnatural to the wild. She followed the trail cautiously, her steps silent on the forest floor. Every instinct in her screamed to retreat, to run. But curiosity drove her forward. What was a human doing this, deep in the wilderness? And why did their scent feel so familiar? As she moved through the trees, she spotted him. He stood there in the clearing, his back to her, staring into the distant horizon. He was tall, his frame lean yet sturdy, and he wore tattered clothes, the fabric of which seemed to blend with the surrounding wilderness. There was something strange about him, something that set him apart from the humans she had heard of in the past. He was not afraid of the forest, not like the others. Her heartbeat quickened, her breath catching in her throat. She remained motionless, hidden in the shadows, watching him. The human did not turn at first. He seemed unaware of her presence, lost in his thoughts. But then, as though feeling her gaze, his head turned slowly, and his eyes met hers. For a moment, neither moved. The wolf was struck by the intensity of his gaze. There was something ancient in his eyes, something that mirrored the sorrow in her own. Something knowing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. And then, the human spoke, his voice soft, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "You've lost them, haven't you?" he asked, his words carrying a strange weight. The wolf recoiled, her fur bristling. She had never met a human who spoke with such understanding. She wanted to growl, to bare her teeth, to retreat into the safety of the shadows. But something held her there. The mystery of his presence, the unspoken bond between them. The human took a step forward, and the wolf instinctively took a step back. Yet, his gaze never left hers, and in that moment, something shifted. She was not alone anymore. The human's eyes lingered on her for a long moment, as though he were seeing something deep within her that even she could not comprehend. The wolf shifted uncomfortably, her instincts urging her to flee, yet something in the human's gaze held her in place. There was no fear in his eyes, only an understanding that made her feel strangely vulnerable. His words hung in the air, still ringing in her ears. "You've lost them, haven't you?" she snarled, the sound low and warning. She hated how his words cut through her like a blade. She wanted to reject him, to leave him behind and disappear into the night, where no one would ever question her sorrow again. Yet, there was a part of her that felt drawn to him, as if he might hold the answers she desperately sought. The human didn't flinch at her aggression. Instead, he stepped closer, his expression softened, almost as if he were sorry for her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly, kneeling slowly to the ground. "I can feel your pain." She tensed, still unsure whether to trust him. But the moment lingered, charged with an invisible energy, and something in the forest around her seemed to respond. The trees whispered again, as though urging her to listen, to remain. For the first time in days, she let her guard down, even if just a fraction. She had no other choice. He had already seen her, and in some strange way, she knew he was not a threat. After a long, agonizing silence, the wolf took a step forward, still cautious, but allowing her presence to be known. She studied the human carefully, wondering what he might be hiding, or if he was somehow tied to the darkness of the forest that had consumed her life. "You don't belong here," she growled, the words not entirely directed at him, but at the vastness of the wilderness itself. It was the forest that had taken everything from her. It was the forest that whispered the memories of the fallen pack in the rustling of the leaves. And yet, here he was, this man who, in some strange way, felt more attuned to the forest than she had ever been. "I don't belong anywhere," the human replied, his voice tinged with a sadness that mirrored her own. "But perhaps we're both here for the same reason, to find something we lost." His words stirred something deep inside her, a flicker of hope, small, fleeting, yet undeniable. The wolf's gaze softened, but only for a moment. She turned away, unwilling to show him the rawness of her grief. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice thick with suspicion. The human looked down at the ground for a brief moment, before raising his eyes to meet hers again. "A wanderer," he said simply. "Someone who has lost more than they can bear." He spoke as though his own pain had driven him to this forest, just as hers had led her here. Perhaps they were not so different after all. Days passed. The wolf and the human traveled together, though they did not speak much. Their bond was unspoken, yet it grew with every shared moment. The wolf could feel it, an undeniable connection between them, something ancient and unnameable. She couldn't explain it, nor did she want to, but it was there like the forest itself, vast and beyond her comprehension. The human knew things about the land, that made her wonder if he was something more than he appeared. He read the signs of the forest as though it were a language he had learned long ago. When they came across a stream, he knew where the fish would be. When they found a pack of predators nearby, he was always the first to sense their presence and move them out of harm's way. But what struck her the most was the way he watched the forest. His eyes seemed to see something she could not. It was as if he was searching for something just beyond the trees, something that even she, with all her senses honed by years of survival, could not detect. In the quiet moments of their journey, she would sometimes catch him staring off into the distance, his face drawn with a quiet, tragic intensity. There was a darkness in him too, a darkness she couldn't yet fathom. "Why do you help me?" the wolf asked one evening, her voice rough from the travel. They had just settled beside a fire, its warmth offering a brief respite from the chill of the forest night. The human did not immediately respond. He gazed into the fire, his face flickering in the flames. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. "Because you remind me of something I lost, something I can't get back." The wolf's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" He turned his gaze toward her, and for the first time, she saw the weariness in his eyes. "I was once like you, a protector, but now I've become something else. I wander because it is all I know." His words were vague, but they carried weight, as if they were tied to a story he had never shared. He glanced down at his hands, fingers curled into fists, as though fighting to keep something buried deep within. "You're running from something, aren't you?" the wolf pressed. "Something that haunts you." The human's face tightened. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked away, toward the edge of the campfire light, where the forest swallowed the darkness. There was something he wasn't telling her, and the wolf could feel it in the air around them. Thick, suffocating. She turned away, frustrated by his silence, but understanding at the same time. She wasn't ready to share her own story, and perhaps he wasn't either. There was a kinship between them, a shared sorrow, but their paths had yet to converge fully. And so, they traveled on, two souls bound by an invisible thread, walking the line between survival and surrender. The days blurred together as they moved deeper into the forest. The human had guided the wolf toward a remote part of the wilderness, a place where few creatures dared to venture. The land was wild, untouched by human hands, and it felt different. The air was thicker, and the shadows seemed to whisper. The wolf's instincts tingled, her senses on high alert. Something was drawing them forward. She could feel it. "Do you hear that?" the wolf asked one evening, her ears twitching at the sound that seemed to come from the heart of the forest. The human paused. His face grew solemn, his expression unreadable. "It's calling you," he said quietly, as if he had been expecting this moment. The wolf felt her heart race. The forest, it was alive in a way she had never understood before. The air was thick with an ancient power, a presence that seemed both comforting and terrifying. "Who's calling me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The human stepped closer, his eyes darkened by the shadows of the forest. "The forest itself, it remembers, and it has something to show you." "Certainly." Let's continue with the next chapter, as the wolf and the human move deeper into the mystery of the forest, growing closer to uncovering the secrets that bind them. The journey through the heart of the forest grew more intense as the days wore on. The air itself seemed to carry an ancient weight, as though the very trees were watching them. The wolf could feel it in the ground beneath her paws. Something stirring, something waiting. She could sense the ancient magic in the air, a force that thrummed beneath her skin, pulling her forward. At night, when the fire burned low and the darkness crept in, the forest became even more alive. The trees whispered to each other in a language she could not understand, but there was something undeniably familiar about it. It was as if they were speaking her name, calling to her. The human said little during these nights, staring into the fire, his expression distant, but the wolf could feel his unease too. There was something in the air that neither of them could escape. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the wolf finally broke the silence. "Do you hear them?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The human did not respond at first. He simply sat there, his eyes closed, listening. The silence stretched on until he finally spoke, his voice almost lost in the wind. "I hear them," he said, his gaze turning toward the trees. "The forest speaks to those who listen closely. It remembers things, ancient things." The wolf watched him carefully. "What do you mean? What is it trying to tell us?" The human hesitated before responding, his words slow and deliberate. "The forest has a memory, just like us," he said, "but its memory is different. It remembers all things that have ever passed through it, every creature, every storm, every death, and it never forgets." The wolf felt a chill creep up her spine. She knew this forest well. She had spent most of her life within its boundaries, but now it felt alien, like something had changed. The very essence of it seemed to have shifted, and the weight of that knowledge pressed down on her. "It remembers my pack?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. The human nodded, his face dark with an emotion the wolf couldn't place. "Yes, it remembers your loss. It remembers the pain, and it has not forgotten the pact that once existed between your kind and mine." The wolf's heart skipped a beat. "A pact? What are you talking about?" The human stood, moving slowly toward the trees. His movements were fluid, almost predatory, and the wolf couldn't help but follow him with her eyes. There was something primal about the way he moved, something that resonated with the very core of her being. "The bond between wolves and humans is ancient," he continued, his voice low. "It is a bond of protection, of balance, but it was broken long ago, before even my time. And the forest, it's been waiting for someone to restore it." The wolf's mind raced. The forest had always been her home, but now it felt as if it were pulling her into something much larger, something beyond her understanding. Her instincts screamed at her to retreat, to flee back to the safety of the open plains, where she was in control. But a part of her, the part she had tried to bury since the loss of her pack, knew she couldn't run anymore. "Restore it? How?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The human turned back to face her, his eyes glowing in the dying light of the fire. "Only you can restore the balance," he said. "Only you can heal what has been broken." The wolf shook her head, disbelief flooding her senses. "I'm just a wolf. I don't know how to fix anything. I couldn't even save my pack." The human stepped forward, his expression softening. "You are more than just a wolf, and you are not alone in this. The forest will guide you, if you are willing to listen." The wolf was silent for a long moment, her thoughts a chaotic storm. She had never thought of herself as anything more than a protector, a survivor. She had never believed in destiny or fate, but now, as she stood on the precipice of something far greater than herself, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut that maybe, just maybe, there was truth in what he said. The days that followed were filled with a strange, unsettling energy. The wolf and the human pressed forward, deeper into the forest, and every step seemed to draw them closer to something they could not yet comprehend. The trees loomed taller here, their branches intertwining in ways that felt unnatural, almost deliberate. The forest had become dense, oppressive, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. It was on the 7th day of their journey, as the sun began to sink behind the horizon, that they reached a clearing. It was unlike any place the wolf had ever seen. The air was thick with a golden mist, and the ground was covered in soft moss that seemed to pulse with life. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak tree, its trunk wide and gnarled, its roots reaching deep into the earth. "This is it," the human said, his voice reverberating with a quiet reverence. The wolf's heart pounded in her chest. She knew without a doubt that this place was sacred. There was something here, something alive, something waiting. The human stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch the tree. The moment his fingers brushed against its bark, a low rumble echoed through the clearing. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the wind howled through the trees. The wolf's senses flared, her instincts screaming at her to retreat. But she could not move. She was rooted to the spot, as though the forest itself had claimed her. The human turned to her, his face illuminated by an otherworldly glow. His eyes were no longer just human. They were something more, something ancient. "The forest has chosen you," he said, his voice filled with a strange power, "and you must face what lies ahead." The wolf's mind was a blur of confusion and fear. She had always trusted the forest, always believed in its mysteries. But now she felt as though the forest had become a trap, and she was its prey. "What is it asking of me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The human's gaze softened. "It asks you to remember the bond between your kind and mine, to restore the balance that was lost." The wind picked up, swirling around them like a tempest, and the wolf felt something stirring deep within her. Something ancient, something she had forgotten. The forest was calling to her, reminding her of something that had been buried for too long. And then, as the air grew thick with anticipation, she heard it, a voice, a whisper, a call. The air was thick with anticipation. The whispering winds stirred the leaves of the ancient oak, creating a symphony of sounds that felt like a song of ages long forgotten. The wolf's heart beat faster, her instincts battling against the pull she felt toward the tree. Something in the air had shifted. Something ancient had stirred. She turned toward the human, who stood with his hand still resting lightly on the oak's rough bark. His expression was unreadable, yet his eyes glowed with an eerie intensity that sent a shiver through her. It was as though the forest had claimed him too, binding him to this place as it had once bound her ancestors. "What is it?" she asked, her voice strained, her breath shallow. "What is this place?" The human didn't respond at first. His gaze was fixed on the tree, his face distant as though he were seeing something beyond its bark. Slowly, he withdrew his hand and turned toward the wolf, his eyes heavy with an emotion she couldn't place. Sadness, regret, or perhaps something more profound. "It's time for you to remember," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly, as if the weight of his words carried the echoes of centuries. The wolf's mind raced. Remember? What did she need to remember? Her past was a blur, pieces of memories tangled with pain and loss. The death of her pack, the empty spaces left behind. She had tried to bury those memories, yet now, standing before this ancient force, the feeling of something forgotten, something vital, pressed against her heart like a wound. Her muscles tensed, and she took a step back, instinctively distancing herself from the tree. But the forest didn't let her escape. The ground beneath her seemed to hum, urging her to stay. "I can't remember," she whispered, a rawness in her voice. The guilt of her failure, the weight of her grief, threatened to crush her. "I've lost too much. There's nothing left." The human stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You have lost nothing. You are not as broken as you believe. This forest, this place, it remembers everything. And it remembers you, too." The wolf's heart pounded in her chest. "Me? What do you mean? I don't understand." The human's lips curled into a faint, melancholic smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The forest holds memories of your kind, the wolves. The bond between wolves and humans was forged long ago, but it was forgotten. The pack you lost, the pack you failed to protect, they're part of something much larger, something that goes beyond death." The wolf's breath hitched. The thought of her pack, her family, suddenly flooded her mind. She could see their faces, hear their voices, feel the warmth of their presence. She had abandoned them. She had failed them. How could she have missed this? This connection, this bond between their souls and the very land she had walked for so long. "Why didn't I know this before?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and confusion. "Why am I only seeing it now?" The human's face darkened, and for the first time, the wolf saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a hint of his own past bleeding through. "You weren't ready," he said quietly. "You were consumed by your grief, your guilt. The forest has waited for you to heal, to see beyond the pain. It couldn't reveal itself to you until you were ready to listen." The wolf's thoughts swirled, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The forest was alive. It had always been alive, and now it was speaking to her, calling her home. But it was a home she had lost, one she couldn't remember, one she wasn't sure she could ever return to. "I've failed," she whispered, her voice cracking. "How can I ever redeem myself?" The human's eyes softened and he stepped closer. "By remembering, by reclaiming what was lost." The clearing grew quieter as the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wolf felt a pull, a pressure in her chest, as if the ground beneath her paws was calling her home. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to push through the pain and the weight of her grief. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, a flicker of something long buried. The pack, her pack. She remembered their faces, sharp eyes, strong bodies, the scent of the forest all around them. They had been her family, her strength, and then, in the blink of an eye, they were gone. Her failure echoed in the silence. But this time, the memory didn't end with their loss. It continued. She saw herself, young and confident, leading them through the forest. She had been their protector, their guide, and they had trusted her. She had been part of something larger than herself, something intertwined with the very pulse of the earth. As the memory deepened, a voice cut through her thoughts, soft yet commanding. "You were never meant to stand alone." The voice wasn't her own. It wasn't even the humans. It was the forest itself, speaking to her, weaving through her mind like a forgotten song. The wolf's eyes snapped open, and she glanced at the human, but his face was unreadable. "You heard that, didn't you?" she asked, her voice thick with disbelief. The human nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the oak tree. "The forest speaks to those who are ready to listen, but its voice is not always clear. It speaks in riddles, in fragments of memories, but it never lies." The wolf closed her eyes again, trying to push through the flood of memories and emotions. The voices, the sights, the sounds of her pack. It was all coming back. But this time, it wasn't just the memories of the past. It was something more, something she had been too blind to see. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shifted, and the wolf felt a deep rumble, the earth trembling as though it were alive. The ancient oak shook, its branches creaking as though in response to some unseen force. The human stepped back, his eyes wide with awe. Or was it fear? "They've come," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The forest remembers, and it calls them back." The wolf's breath caught in her throat. What was happening? Was this the forest reaching out to her? Was it summoning something from the depths of her past? The answer loomed before her, yet she couldn't bring herself to understand. The wind howled again, louder this time, as though the forest itself were in mourning. And then, through the mist, the wolf saw them. Shadows emerged from the trees, figures moving, ethereal and fading, like ghosts rising from the past. They were her pack, their faces twisted with sorrow and longing, as if they, too, had been waiting for her to remember. The mist swirled like a living entity, clinging to the wolf's fur and clouding her vision. As the forest around her grew darker, she felt a strange pull, an overwhelming weight in the air, drawing her towards something ancient. For a moment, she stood motionless, unsure of what was happening. Then, from the shadows, the figures began to appear.
Her heart skipped a beat as the ghostly forms of her pack materialized before her, each one shimmering with a faint glow, like remnants of a forgotten dream. They were not solid, not flesh and blood, but their presence was undeniable. The wolf's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening as her eyes darted from one figure to the next. There was her mother, her brother, her closest friends, each of them standing in the mist, their forms translucent yet hauntingly real. For a long moment, the wolf could do nothing but stare. Her pack, the family she had failed to protect, stood before her, not as memories, but as echoes of what had once been. The figure of her mother stepped forward, her silvery fur glistening faintly in the mist. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and wisdom, now held only sorrow and understanding. The wolf's throat tightened. "Mother," she whispered, the words catching in her chest. Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't save you. I failed." Her mother's ghost didn't speak, but her eyes, though distant, seemed to convey something unspoken. A deep, silent understanding. The wolf felt the sharp pang of guilt flood her chest, and she dropped her head, ashamed. She had been the protector. She should have done more. She should have been there when they needed her. I couldn't protect you, the wolf repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The mist shifted, and the figure of her brother appeared next. His bright eyes were wide, full of the youthful energy that had once brought a smile to her face. His tail wagged slowly, the motion almost comforting, but it only deepened her grief. His form flickered, vanishing and reappearing, like a fleeting memory she could never hold on to. I failed you, too, the wolf choked out. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save anyone. The wolf's paws began to tremble as the realization struck her like a thunderclap. These weren't just the spirits of her pack. They were memories, reflections of the past brought to life by the forest itself. The forest had conjured them, not to torment her, but to help her understand what she had lost and, perhaps, to remind her of what she still had left to do. As the mist thickened and the shadows of her pack began to fade, the wolf's gaze met the human's. He had been standing silently in the background, watching her confrontation with the ghosts. His face, though soft, was filled with a quiet sadness. "They're not truly gone, are they?" the wolf whispered to him, her voice breaking. The human stepped forward, his eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "They are gone from this world, but not from you. The forest remembers them. And now, it calls you to remember." The wolf looked back toward the fading figures of her family. Her heart ached, but she couldn't turn away. The forest had returned them to her, briefly, to guide her. "They are not gone," the human continued. "Their essence remains within you, and within the forest. It is time for you to embrace your role, to restore what has been lost." The wolf swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the human's words settle upon her. The guilt, the loss, the emptiness that had consumed her for so long, all of it was still there, but now it was tempered by something deeper. Understanding. The ghosts of her pack had not come to condemn her, they had come to guide her, to remind her that the bond between them was eternal. It lived on in the forest, in the earth, in the air that she breathed. With a final lingering look at the fading figures, the wolf's shoulders sagged, a wave of relief washing over her. She could feel their love, still with her, still guiding her, but now, it was time to move forward. "They've gone," she whispered again, this time not in sorrow, but in acceptance. "But they've shown me the way." The human nodded, his face softening. "The forest remembers. And now it is time for you to restore the balance. You are the last of your kind, but you are not alone in this." The wolf stood tall. The mist was dissipating, the figures of her pack slowly fading back into the shadows of the trees, leaving behind only the echo of their presence. She had felt them, truly felt them, guiding her, teaching her. They had come not to haunt her, but to help her find the strength to move forward. Her heart was still heavy with the weight of their loss, but now, she understood. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them, for everything they had been, and for the forest that had given her everything. "It's time," she said quietly. And with those words, the wolf turned away from the altar of her memories, toward the path that lay ahead. The forest, alive with ancient power, whispered around her, its spirit calling her to restore what had been broken. The wolf moved through the forest with a newfound sense of purpose. The fog had lifted, but the weight of her encounter with her pack's ghosts lingered in her chest. Their presence was still with her, a soft murmur in the back of her mind, urging her on. The human walked beside her, his silence no longer a comforting presence, but a signal that the time for words was over. She was nearing the heart of the forest, where the true trial awaited her. He had said that the forest had chosen her, that she was the one who could restore the balance, but the weight of that responsibility felt heavier with every step she took. The path ahead was shrouded in shadow, the trees taller here, their branches twisted and reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. It was as if the forest itself had become more hostile, more oppressive. The wolf's instincts screamed at her to be careful, to tread lightly. Something was wrong. "There's something ahead," the wolf muttered, her voice tense. The human didn't respond at first. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as though sensing the same thing. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if he were preparing for something unknown. The air grew colder, the wind picking up, howling through the branches of the ancient trees. The wolf's fur stood on end as she felt the shift in the atmosphere, a surge of energy that thrummed beneath her paws, vibrating through the very earth. "It's here," the human said softly, his voice filled with reverence. "The heart of the forest, where it all began." The wolf's eyes scanned the dense trees ahead. In the distance, through the twisting shadows, she saw it, a darkened clearing. The ground was marked by strange symbols, half hidden in the undergrowth, but they pulsed with an ancient power. It was as if the earth itself was alive, waiting for something to happen. The human stepped forward, raising his hand as if to stop her. This is where the pact was sealed, where the balance was maintained. And it is here where you must face the trials. The wolf felt a chill run down her spine. Trials? She asked, her voice tight with apprehension. The trials of the forest, he replied, his eyes dark. They are the test of your spirit. Only if you succeed will you be able to restore the balance. You must be ready, wolf. This is where everything changes. The wolf took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The trials of the forest had begun, and there was no turning back. The wolf's senses were heightened, every muscle in her body tensed as she moved toward the darkened clearing. The symbols on the ground pulsed faintly, their ancient energy stirring the air around her, thick with a foreboding power. The trees that surrounded the clearing loomed tall, their branches intertwining like the hands of 1,000 unseen specters. She felt a knot in her stomach, a sense of dread that only grew as she stepped closer. The human remained beside her, his eyes steady, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the magnitude of what lay ahead. Despite the calm exterior he showed, she could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. This is where the trials will begin. The ground beneath them hummed, a low vibration that resonated through the wolf's paws, sending a shiver up her spine. The forest had grown unnaturally still. Even the usual whispers of the wind had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in from all sides. "Are you ready?" the human asked, his voice low. The wolf didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but there was no turning back now. She had come too far, faced too many challenges, to turn away. Her pack's ghosts had shown her that. They had returned to guide her, to remind her of her purpose. And now, the forest awaited her response. "I have no choice," she said softly, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. She stepped forward, her paws making no sound on the moss-covered ground. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her, vibrating with ancient energy, and it called to her in a way that was both unsettling and inviting. As they entered the clearing, the symbols on the ground flared briefly, glowing with an ethereal light. The clearing was surrounded by thick, twisted roots, their gnarled limbs reaching outward as if trying to hold them in place. The human reached out a hand, placing it gently on her shoulder. "These are the trials, wolf," he said quietly. "The forest will test you, and you must face what lies within." Suddenly, the air shifted. A gust of wind howled through the trees, and the clearing was flooded with a strange, cold mist. The wolf's breath hitched, and she instinctively looked toward the human. He gave her a faint, reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "They are here," he said softly. From the mist, shadows began to move. At first, they were indistinct, like tendrils of smoke, but as the mist cleared, the figures took shape. They were not animals or people, but creatures twisted and dark, like embodiments of the forest's deepest fears. Their bodies were composed of shadows and light, their forms flickering in and out of existence, as if they were not fully part of the world they inhabited. The wolf's heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she faltered. These creatures, they were unlike anything she had ever seen before. Dark spirits, born of the forest's deepest wounds. They were the forest's way of testing her. They were the physical manifestation of the trials she must face. "They are not real," the human said, his voice almost lost in the rising wind. "They are born of your own fears, your guilt, your pain. You must face them, and you must conquer them." The wolf stood still, her body tense. These creatures were not real, but the fear they invoked was all too real. Her mother's death, her brother's loss, the pack she had failed, all of it surged within her, a flood of emotions that she struggled to contain. The forest knew her pain, and it was using it against her. A shadowy figure loomed before her, its form shifting like smoke. It was vaguely wolf-like, but its features were distorted, grotesque, an embodiment of death. The wolf's breath quickened as it inched closer, its dark eyes locked onto hers. "You couldn't save them," the figure growled, its voice low and guttural. "You failed your pack. You let them die." The word struck the wolf like a blow to the chest. The pain she had buried for so long came rushing back, drowning her in guilt. The wolf's legs trembled, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse. The forest had found her weakness, and it was now using it against her. But she refused to back down. "No," she said, her voice shaking at first but gaining strength. "I didn't fail them. I did everything I could, and I'll do it again." The shadowy figure snarled, its form flickering in and out of existence. "But you couldn't save them," it whispered again, its voice dripping with venom. "You were too weak." The wolf's eyes burned with anger, but beneath that anger was something more, something powerful, something ancient. It was the strength of her pack, the memory of her mother's love, the bond she had shared with her brother. "I wasn't weak," she said, louder this time, her voice rising above the shadows. "I was their protector, and I still am. I will never forget them, and I will never stop fighting for them." With those words, the shadowy figure recoiled, its form flickering more violently before it dissolved into the air. The wolf stood tall, her heart still racing, but her resolve stronger than ever. The forest had tested her, and she had passed. But the trials were far from over. Another figure emerged from the mist. This one was larger, more menacing, its eyes glowing with a fiery intensity. It was an ancient being, one born of the very forest itself. Its body was twisted, its limbs elongated and clawed, its mouth filled with sharp, jagged teeth. It was no longer just a manifestation of her fears, it was something far worse. The human stepped forward, his voice steady. "This is the final trial, the trial of acceptance. You must face the forest itself, and accept the truth of your destiny." The wolf stood her ground, her body trembling, but she refused to back down. She would face this trial, just as she had faced all the others. The forest had chosen her for a reason, and she would not fail again. The creature snarled, its eyes narrowing. "You are not worthy," it hissed. "You are nothing but a wolf, a mere creature of instinct. The forest belongs to something greater than you." The wolf's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't falter. She had already accepted her past, her failure. But she had also accepted that she was not alone. She had the strength of her pack, the wisdom of her ancestors, and the guidance of the forest itself. "I am not just a wolf," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unyielding. "I am the guardian of this forest, and I will restore what has been broken." With those words, the creature's form began to shift, flickering wildly as if struggling against her will. The air around them thickened, charged with the power of the forest. The wolf could feel it, her destiny. She was the one to restore the balance. She was the one to heal the wounds of the past. The creature howled in defeat, its form dissolving into the mist. The clearing was still once more. The trials were over. The mist that had once clouded the clearing now seemed to dissipate, the air growing clearer as the wolf stood tall, her body trembling from the intensity of the trials she had just faced. The forest was still, holding its breath. The creatures of darkness, manifestations of her guilt and her failures, were gone. The air no longer hummed with ominous power, but with a quiet, powerful energy. The same energy that had surrounded her since the first step of this journey. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from something far deeper, resolve. The human was silent beside her, his face etched with quiet approval. He had watched as she faced the trials, as she overcame the spirits of her past and the physical embodiment of her doubts. "This is it," the wolf whispered, her voice hoarse from the trials, but her determination unwavering. "This is where it ends, where it all begins." The human nodded, his gaze steady. "You've passed the trials, but this is where you must make your final choice." The clearing seemed to pulse with life, the ancient symbols that had glowed earlier now fading into the earth itself. The wolf felt a deeper connection to the land than ever before, a pull, a call that emanated from the earth below her. The forest was speaking to her in ways that words could not capture. In the distance, through the trees, the wolf saw a faint glow, the heart of the forest. It was as if the forest had opened itself to her, revealing its soul. The moment of truth had come. The human stepped back, his voice calm and knowing. "The forest has chosen you, just as you have chosen it. But now you must face the hardest trial of all." The wolf turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "What is that trial?" "You must choose to take the mantle of guardian, to accept your role as the one who heals the forest, and to protect the balance from those who would see it destroyed." The wolf's heart clenched. She understood the gravity of his words. This was more than just restoring the balance. It was about taking up the mantle that had been passed down through generations. The weight of it almost crushed her. It was not just about her failure or her redemption. It was about the future of everything she had known, the future of the forest, the creatures within it, and the very legacy of her pack. "I've already chosen," she said, her voice strong despite the uncertainty that stirred within her. "I have no other choice. This is my path." The human gave her a final, almost imperceptible nod. "Then go, wolf. Go to the heart of the forest. The final step awaits you there." With a single, deep breath, the wolf turned toward the glowing light in the distance. She began to walk, each step carrying her closer to her destiny. The trees seemed to part as she moved, opening a path toward the heart of the forest. She could feel the energy of the land beneath her paws, pulsing with every heartbeat. The earth was alive, and she was connected to it in ways she could not fully understand. As she moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the world around her faded. The wind that had once whispered in the branches now stood silent. The ground beneath her was soft, like moss, but firm. It was the beginning of something new. And then, she saw it. At the center of the clearing was a massive tree, its trunk thick and ancient. The roots spread wide, intertwining with the earth, and above it, the branches reached toward the sky like arms of life itself. It was the heart of the forest, its beating pulse. The wolf approached slowly, the weight of what lay ahead settling on her shoulders. She could feel the forest's power emanating from the tree, but it was not an oppressive power. It was a call, a beckoning. She was not just walking toward the heart of the forest, she was walking toward her own destiny. As she reached the base of the tree, she felt something shift. The air grew thick with magic. The ground beneath her trembled, and the earth seemed to open, revealing a stone altar beneath the tree. This was the final step. The stone altar glowed with the same ancient symbols she had seen before. It was here that the pact had been made, where her ancestors had sealed their bond with the land. And now, it was her turn to reaffirm that bond. She placed her paw on the altar, feeling the power surge through her, filling her with warmth. The energy of the forest flooded her body, and she closed her eyes, allowing it to flow through her. She felt her connection to the forest deepen. The memory of her pack, the ghosts of her family, the legacy of her kind, it all came together in that moment. The forest had always been a part of her, and now, she was a part of it. Her body shuddered as the magic took hold. She could feel the earth beneath her, the life flowing through it. She was no longer just a wolf. She was the forest's guardian, bound by the land, by her ancestors, and by her pack's memory. The energy surged one last time, and the light from the altar enveloped her, shining brightly before it faded back into the earth. The wolf stood, panting, her body still vibrating with the power of the forest. She had completed the trial. She had accepted her role. The light that had surrounded the wolf slowly faded, and the forest seemed to exhale, its breath a quiet, collective sigh of relief. The air was still thick with magic, but there was a sense of peace now, a calm that had not been present before. The wolf stood tall, her heart still racing from the surge of energy she had just experienced. She could feel the power of the forest within her, its heartbeat aligned with her own. The legacy of her ancestors, the memory of her pack, the forest itself. She was no longer just a solitary creature lost in grief. She was a protector, a guardian of something far larger than herself. The human stood at the edge of the clearing, his expression unreadable. He had watched her complete the trials, seen her rise from the ashes of her past. And now, he saw the strength in her that she had once doubted. "You've done it," he said softly, his voice filled with respect. The wolf's eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw him as he truly was, not just a guide, but a part of the forest's greater plan. There was no more mystery, no more uncertainty. She knew what she had to do. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady, her heart full of purpose. The human nodded. "The forest is yours now. Protect it, let it, and remember, there is no such thing as failure. Only lessons learned and paths to be walked." The wolf looked toward the heart of the forest, her pack's memory still with her, guiding her steps. The path ahead was hers to lead. The forest had returned to her, and in return, she had become its guardian. From that day forward, the wolf roamed the forest with a renewed purpose. No longer was a solitary creature haunted by the ghosts of her past, she a protector, a guardian of the land that had always been her home. The balance had been restored, and though the forest would always hold its secrets, she now walked beside it, a keeper of its mysteries, its magic, and its life. The whispers of the trees were no longer filled with sorrow, but with a quiet song of healing. And in the stillness of the forest, the wolf could hear the soft echoes of her pack, their love and strength guiding her every step. The forest was no longer just a place she had wandered through, it was now a part of her, and she, a part of it. Together, they would endure. The wolf's transformation from a grieving, solitary creature to the guardian of the forest was not a simple change. It was a profound awakening, one that reached deep into the very core of the land and into the ancient spirits that had always watched over it. The forest was no longer just the backdrop to her pain and loss. It was now her ally, her partner, and her greatest responsibility. The first days after the trial were quiet. The wolf had returned to the heart of the forest, to the ancient tree that had called her to take her place among the guardians of the land. The human, now a quiet observer, had disappeared into the shadows of the forest, his role complete. The forest was hers to protect now. But with this responsibility came an unspoken understanding. The forest was as fragile as it was powerful. The balance she had restored was delicate, and there were forces, ancient forces, that would seek to undermine it. As the seasons shifted, the wolf noticed subtle changes in the forest. The leaves began to fall earlier than they should, the underbrush became thick with overgrowth, and the air grew unnaturally still, as if something were watching from the shadows. These were signs, warnings, that the balance she had worked so hard to restore was being threatened. The wolf moved deeper into the forest, her senses alert to every rustling leaf, and every change in the wind. She could feel it, something was wrong. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, the forest fell unnervingly silent. The wind no longer whispered through the trees, and the usual rustling of nocturnal creatures had ceased. The wolf's instinct screamed at her to be on guard. She stood still, listening, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her paws. A flicker of movement in the distance caught her attention. The wolf's body tensed, her muscles coiling, ready for action. She moved toward the disturbance, her senses heightened as she navigated through the dense woods. When she reached the clearing, her heart sank. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was a dark figure. It was cloaked in shadow, its shape indistinct, like a wraith. The wolf's breath caught in her throat. "You've come," the figure spoke, its voice hollow and cold. It was a voice the wolf recognized, though it had not heard it in years. The voice was like a memory, tainted with bitterness. "You are not welcome here," the wolf growled, stepping forward, her fur bristling. "Leave this place." The figure did not move. Instead, it seemed to emanate a darkness that chilled the very air. "I have no need to leave. I am part of the forest, just as you are. I am the shadow that balances your light, and I have come to remind you, everything is not as it seems." The wolf's eyes narrowed. "You speak of shadows, of lies. I've restored the balance. I've become the guardian. What more could you want?" The figure chuckled, a low, rasping sound that sent a shiver through the wolf's spine. "The balance you've restored is fragile, and the forces of darkness will always seek to undo it. The forest is not just light and life, it is also darkness and death. You cannot protect it by simply embracing the light." The wolf's heart thudded in her chest. The shadows, the dark forces, had always existed in the forest, part of its natural cycle. But she had believed that her bond with the land, her connection to the light of her pack, could keep those forces at bay. "I will protect the forest," the wolf said firmly. "I've faced my darkness, and I will not let it consume me, nor the land." The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words. "We shall see," it whispered. "The darkness has been here longer than you've known, and it is not finished with you yet." With a swirl of shadow, the figure vanished, leaving the wolf standing alone in the silence. The weight of its words hung in the air, an ominous warning that she could not ignore. Something was stirring in the depths of the forest, a force of darkness that threatened everything she had worked to protect. Days turned into weeks, and the wolf found herself at the center of the storm that was brewing in the forest. The once harmonious balance between light and dark had shifted, and she could feel the presence of the dark force growing stronger with each passing day. It was not just the creatures of the forest that were affected, something deeper, something ancient, was stirring beneath the earth. The roots of the great trees seemed to groan in discomfort, the wind howled unnaturally, and even the animals that had once roamed freely now moved with a sense of fear, as if they were being hunted by something they could not see. The wolf knew she could not face this force alone. The darkness was unlike anything she had encountered before. It was not simply an absence of light, it was an ancient power, something older than the forest itself. She sought guidance from the heart of the forest once more, returning to the massive tree that had called her to her role as guardian. The power within the tree had waned since her first trial, and now, it felt distant, almost unreachable. The forest was weak, and she knew that she needed to restore its strength if she was to stand against the shadow. She placed her paw against the tree's ancient bark, feeling the connection that had once been so strong. The magic of the forest still flowed through her, but it was dimming, like a candle burning low. She closed her eyes, willing herself to connect with the heart of the land, willing the energy to surge through her once more. But no answer came. Her heart sank. The darkness was already here, and it was consuming the very essence of the forest. The wolf stood, her mind racing, trying to think of a solution. She could no longer rely solely on the forest's magic, she would have to fight this battle with everything she had. The memory of her pack flooded her mind once more. Their faces, their love, their sacrifices, they had not truly left her. They were with her still, and their strength would guide her. The wolf would not let the darkness swallow everything she held dear. The wolf knew what she must do. To save the forest, she would have to face the darkness head-on. But she could not do it alone. She called out, her voice carrying across the land, reaching deep into the heart of the forest. She called for help, for strength, for guidance. She needed the forest to awaken, to rise against the shadow that threatened to consume them all. And then, as the first light of dawn touched the earth, something incredible happened. The forest began to stir. The trees, once dormant, began to move. Their branches creaked and groaned, stretching toward the sky, and the roots of the ancient tree pulsed with energy once more. The forest had not abandoned her, it had merely been waiting for her to reclaim her place as its guardian. The shadows began to retreat as the light of the wolf's resolve burned brightly. She had accepted her role, and now, the forest responded. The ancient powers of the earth surged through her, stronger than ever before. The darkness that had threatened the forest recoiled, but it did not vanish. The final confrontation was at hand, and the wolf was ready to face it. The wolf stood at the edge of the forest, her body tense with anticipation. The forest had responded to her call, its ancient power now flowing through her veins. She could feel the heartbeat of the land beneath her paws, its pulse steady and strong, reminding her that she was never truly alone. In the distance, the shadow loomed, a swirling mass of darkness that threatened to engulf everything in its path. The wolf's heart was calm, though, for she knew what she had to do. The trials, the loss, the weight of her past, none of it mattered anymore. She had embraced her destiny, accepted her role as the forest's guardian. With each step forward, she could feel the power of the earth surging through her. The trees, the wind, the very ground beneath her feet, they all whispered to her, urging her on. The darkness was a force of destruction, but it was not invincible. It could be defeated, for the forest itself had never truly abandoned her. The wolf's eyes locked onto the shadow ahead, its swirling tendrils threatening to choke the life from everything in their wake. She stepped forward, her voice strong as she called out to the darkness. "Leave this place," she commanded, her voice filled with the power of the earth and the strength of her ancestors. The darkness paused, its movement faltering for a brief moment. The wolf's heart raced as the shadow seemed to ripple, as if questioning her strength. She could feel its malice, its coldness, but she did not falter. She stood tall, knowing that she was not only fighting for the forest, but for herself, for the pack she had lost, and for the legacy of those who had once stood with her. "You do not control this land," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am its guardian, and I will protect it, no matter the cost." The darkness surged forward, its tendrils reaching toward her, but the wolf was ready. She closed her eyes, feeling the energy of the forest pulse through her. The roots of the trees seemed to rise from the earth, twisting and intertwining, forming a barrier between her and the shadow. The wolf opened her eyes and, with a powerful roar, charged forward. The battle was fierce, a clash of light and dark, of life and death. The forest fought alongside her, its power flowing through the wolf's body as she lashed out at the darkness, her claws glowing with the energy of the earth. Each strike she made was a testament to the strength she had gained, not only as the guardian of the forest, but as the protector of its legacy. With one final, mighty roar, the wolf struck at the heart of the shadow. The darkness recoiled, its form unraveling as the forest's power enveloped it, dissolving it into the earth. The wolf stood panting, her heart racing, but her eyes shining with victory. The forest had been saved. As the last remnants of the darkness faded into the earth, the forest slowly began to come alive again. The wind stirred the branches, the leaves rustled, and the air seemed to fill with a sense of peace that had long been absent. The wolf stood at the center of the clearing, her body tired but her spirit strong. The land was no longer in peril, the balance had been restored. The forest had been healed, and she, the guardian, had fulfilled her destiny. Looking up at the sky, she saw the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees, painting the world in soft hues of gold and pink. The wolf could feel the presence of her pack, those she had lost, and those she had fought to protect, surrounding her in spirit. Their love, their strength, was still with her, guiding her. She knew that her journey was not over. The forest would always need a protector, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the wolf felt at peace. She had found her place, her purpose. She was the forest's guardian, and nothing could ever take that away from her. The wind whispered through the trees once more, and the wolf closed her eyes, listening to the song of the land. The forest was home, and as the sun rose higher, the wolf knew that she had become one with it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the forest. The wolf's story is one of strength, redemption, and the power of embracing our past to shape our future. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales of courage and adventure. If you'd like to share your thoughts or ask any questions, drop a comment below. What did you think of the wolf's transformation? And what does guardianship mean to you? We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember to stay strong, stay true to your path, and always listen to the whispers of the world around you. Take care.